Welcome to SB&M is Here, the State Bar of New Mexico's official podcast. In this series, we'll discuss topics such as professional development, tools of the legal trade, and mental and professional well-being. Connecting the legal community across New Mexico, SB&M is here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Season 3 of SB&M is Here. This is Morgan Pettit, Member Services Manager and Podcast Producer. Today's episode, we hope, is more of an evergreen topic for you that you can revisit whenever it is time to renew your license. You see those licensing option checkboxes on your membership renewal, and you may be wondering what one is applicable to you. What does an inactive license actually mean? What does it mean to withdraw? And what if you just had a major life event, say like having a child, or you need to take care of your physical or mental health, and you may just need a break for a while? What do you do then? Tune in as Bill Slease, the Professional Development Program Director, and Kate Kennedy, our Office of General Counsel Deputy Director, answer some of those questions and more. It's a quick 18-minute listen that we hope can help you really better understand your membership status. So with that, Bill and Kate, feel free, take it away.
All right, thanks, Morgan. So we're here today to talk about the different licensing options in New Mexico. This is a time of year where a lot of attorneys reach out to regulatory programs, wondering what their options are, assuming they don't want to be an active attorney any longer. And we have a lot of other options. We have a lot of options that aren't necessarily active or withdrawn. So we thought it would be informational to kind of go over those. So let's just start with the first one. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to have an active law license in New Mexico?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kate. So an active law license is exactly what you would expect, which means that you are able to practice law in whatever sort of practice area you choose, whether that's a public setting, whether you work for a nonprofit, whether you have a private practice. You have your relationships with your clients, you have all the rules of professional conduct to which you're subject. And there are a few things you do annually to keep your law license active. You pay an annual fee and complete at least 12 hours of continuing legal education, 2 of which have to be in courses dealing with ethics and professionalism, and only 4 of which can be completed by self-study. And an active license presently, I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood in between 7,700 and 8,000 lawyers, somewhere in there, that are actively licensed. Yep. The majority of those live in-state. There's probably a couple thousand that are living out of state but maintain an active license in New Mexico. And of course, that's been true ever since New Mexico adopted reciprocity. We saw an influx of lawyers from out of state who wanted to hold a New Mexico license and practice at some level here. So the active license is what you think of probably when you think of most of the lawyers who are practicing law in New Mexico, and everything that comes with it. That's renewed annually. In fact, we're coming up, as you probably all know, on license renewal time here in the next couple of months.
Awesome. Perfect. And then if you were perhaps not going to practice law any longer, you have the option to go inactive. Can you talk a little bit about what that would look like?
Right. So there's 2 things you could do if you decided that you no longer wanted to practice and pay the fees associated with an active license, right? So the first thing you could do is go inactive. INACTIVE, right? So inactive license means that you no longer can practice law, but you still maintain a presence and pay a much reduced annual fee. I think right now it's $100 a year.
Correct. Until you turn 70, at which point it's free. So yes.
Right. And so with an inactive status, what it does is it suspends that CLE requirements. You're not required to continue your continuing education courses because the theory, of course, is that you're not practicing. And your license is still available to reactivate in the event you change your mind and want to come back. And if you decide that's what you want to do, there's a couple things to be aware of if you decide you want to come back from inactive status. Of course, the first thing that you want to do if you decide to come back is you're going to have to catch up any CLE credits that were missing in the year you went inactive. So if you were at 10 hours when you decided to go inactive, you're going to have to pick up those extra 2, as well as get all 12 hours for the year in which you come back in. And so that's one of the 2 requirements to be aware of if you go inactive. The other thing that an inactive member can do when they petition to come back in is they need to be paying attention to the timing of it. If you're out more than a year on inactive status, then you're going to have to file a petition with the Board of Bar Examiners, and they are going to conduct a character and fitness investigation before they make any recommendations to the Supreme Court about whether you should be returned to active status. If you do it in less than a year, you simply file your request to come back with the State Bar of New Mexico, get your CLEs up to date for whatever deficiencies you might have, get them up to date for the year you're coming back, pay your fees, and you're back in, right? But if you go more than a year, that's a little bit more of an involved process. You're going to have to go back through character and fitness. And for most people, that's not really a big deal, but something to be aware of, that the process is going to take a little bit longer. And there may be some additional cost associated with it going back through Board of Bar Examiners. What you probably don't want to do, unless you're certain that you would never, ever want to come back to the practice of law in New Mexico, is withdraw. If you withdraw, that's essentially a forever proposition unless you're willing to take another bar exam. And so you can file with the New Mexico Supreme Court a written notice that you're voluntarily withdrawing. And if the court approves it, you forfeit your law license in New Mexico and you have to cease practicing law. Of course, that means you don't have to pay any annual fees. You don't have to do an annual continuing education requirement, but you cannot petition to reactivate. You can return to the practice either by taking that bar exam, or if you happen to still qualify under the reciprocity rules, I suppose you could come back that way. But it's a bigger deal. In other words, you're starting over. And so for most people, that option is not as attractive because it limits their options much more significantly than inactive status. But if you truly think that's it, I'm done, I never want to do this practice of law thing again, then withdrawal might be a way to do it. And then it's a no-cost annual approach.
Perfect. And one question we get a lot here too is for attorneys who have gone inactive for several years, they'll ask, well, do I have to do CLE for every year that I've been inactive? And the answer is no. Just like Bill said, it's anything that you were, any sort of CLEs that you needed to get when you went inactive. And then once you're reactivated, you do have to get any CLEs that would be required that year. So it's a good option, I think, especially if people just want to pause for a little bit.
Right.
And go inactive.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you just as an aside, that's similar in other jurisdictions. I'm licensed in another jurisdiction. I had nothing active going there for many, many years and decided in terms of a cost benefit analysis, it'd be much better for me to go inactive. I didn't want to withdraw because I didn't want to go back through the entire application process, the bar exam, all of that. So I went inactive. I pay the inactive fee in that jurisdiction every year. It gives me the option of going back in at some point in a more abbreviated fashion, recognizing that I would still have to catch up my CLEs in that jurisdiction for the year I come back in. I was caught up the year I went inactive. So it'd just be for the year I come back in. And I'd have to probably go back through their character and fitness evaluation, which I'm not too concerned about, as most lawyers wouldn't be. But there's a process involved, so it's something to be aware of.
Right. And I think inactive is a good option for attorneys who maybe they're a little bit burnt out. They need a break. Maybe they have a massive life event. You just had a kid and you want to take a couple years off, or maybe something health-wise that you need to take care of and just focus on that. I think inactive is a really good option for those attorneys. Like you said, it doesn't have to be a huge deal to come back to active status.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and the other thing, you talk about people taking time off or wanting to take a little break from it. The other option, if cost is not as big a consideration or concern for you, there's nothing with an active license that requires you to keep representing clients working for agencies doing that sort of thing. If you're willing to get your CLE credits every year, if you're willing to pay the full annual fee, you can keep your license active and just slow down, right? Or stop your working, I suppose, altogether, stop practicing
Right.
on a day-to-day basis, which really gives you then the great option if you decide that you want to I don't want to say reinstate because that's not the right word. If you want to come back in sort of a fuller capacity, then you're already poised to do that if you left your license in an active status. But there's a cost associated with it, not just in terms of the annual licensing fee, but also you're going to have to keep your CLEs up to date so that you stay proficient. But I do know some lawyers who decide, as you said, Kate, they're burned out, they're needing a break, they maybe need a year off, there's been a major life event, and they decide they're going to keep their license active. They just basically sort of retire in place for a short period of time and then come back to the active license without ever actually having put it in any different license status.
Right. Yeah, perfect. So then we have a couple of other license statuses I'm hoping you can talk about. One of them is what we call limited license, and it has to do with working with legal services providers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's Rule 15-301.2 under the New Mexico Rules Annotated. So if an attorney is taken inactive status, but they still want to provide limited services, they can apply to the New Mexico Supreme Court for a legal services provider limited law license. What that means is they're going to go through a character and fitness investigation with the Board of Bar Examiners. And if assuming the Board of Bar Examiners recommends issuance of the limited license to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court does approve the license, then the applicant attorney can provide a range of legal services to clients in New Mexico. That's true whether it's for monetary compensation or otherwise, provided they're working through a qualified legal services provider. And that's a term of art under the rules. A qualified legal services provider is a not-for-profit legal services organization whose primary purpose is to provide legal services to low-income clients. They're classified as a Section 501c3 under the IRS code. They're registered with the New Mexico Attorney General as a registry of charitable organizations, and they've been recommended by the New Mexico Commission on Access to Justice to provide these kind of legal services. If you do that, it's a reduced annual licensing fee, currently $125. You still are going to have to pay for and complete your continuing education of 12 hours each year. And you're going to have to pay your disciplinary fee of $150 per year and your client protection of $15 per year. But that remains effective, that license, unless you terminate employment with that service provider and don't immediately go and get employed by and approved for another legal service provider who meets those definitions. It's a good way for somebody who decides they want to slow down or modify the focus of their practice such that they are providing services to people who otherwise are really not able to access legal services. And if you think about it, it's really a strong way to open access to justice for those who are, for lack of a better term, disenfranchised from the legal system because they don't have the wherewithal, the financial means to hire an attorney, and so they're having to really rely on qualified legal services provider for their legal needs. So it's a good way to capture experience for a lawyer who is really wanting to do that sort of public service work, but maybe wants to do it in a reduced time frame fashion, wants to do just maybe part-time work when they get done with their full-time practice of law, whatever their situation might be. But it's a great alternative for someone who decides that they don't want to keep an active license, but they do want to keep their hand in the game, so to speak.
Right. That's awesome. And then there's one last status that we wanted to touch on, which is emeritus attorneys. Can you talk a little bit about that status?
Yeah, that's a relatively recent rule, and that's Rule 24-111. So an emeritus attorney is an attorney who is or was licensed in good standing in New Mexico or any other jurisdiction, who either withdrew from the practice of law or transferred to inactive status, and then does not ask for or receive compensation of any kind for performance of legal services, but is allowed to participate in an emeritus pro bono program. What does that mean? Well, the New Mexico Supreme Court, you have to petition them, and then an emeritus attorney has to work in association with an approved legal aid organization, and they have to be actively supervised by a fully licensed, actively licensed attorney. If you're approved for an emeritus license, then you can appear in court on behalf of a client of an approved legal aid organization. So you won't have your own clients, right? You have to be working for an approved legal aid organization. And you're going to have your supervising attorney give you written approval for that appearance. You can prepare pleadings and other documents, right? And you can provide other services that the legal aid organization authorizes. Again, you've got to have your supervising attorney approving and consenting to those and sort of watching what you're doing. For purposes of that program, an approved legal aid organization is very much like the approved limited law license legal service providers, right? It's provides services to low income clients, 501c3, IRS non-exempt, tax exempt organization, a nonprofit in other words. Register with the Attorney General on their General Registry of Charitable Organizations, again recommended by the Access to Justice Commission, and will be providing malpractice insurance for the emeritus attorney to cover services that attorney is providing. And so emeritus attorneys, the difference between that and the legal limited law license rule, legal service provider, you might be wondering, well, if you're an emeritus attorney, you're exempt from the annual license, the disciplinary, and the client protection fees, and you're not required to comply with the annual continuing legal education requirements, right? So still able to provide certain pro bono services. You have to be directly supervised by a lawyer in the legal aid organization, but less of an economic draw on you if you decide to go emeritus route. So services a little more limited, cost a little bit less than it would be if you were working under a legal services provider license.
Awesome. Thank you. And just one last thing I'd like to say about any of these status, if you have any questions, we're happy to help you. If you're interested in going inactive, if you wanted to reactivate a license, you can email us at license@sbnm.org, and we're happy to sort of walk you down the path or help you reactivate your license, whatever it is you need, just be a source of information.
Yeah, and the other thing is there's a lot of information available on our website related to licensure. And in fact, I did a brief article that's available called So You Think You Might Want to Retire. It's got pretty much the information we talked about today available to you. Just access it through www.sbnm.org. Look for the professional development program link and look for articles and newsletters. You'll find an article in there that's got more information. And if you've got questions, of course, in addition to calling or emailing the good people in our regulatory department, by all means, feel free to reach out to me directly. And if I can help, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Member Services Department. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Kevin McLeod at Incomtech. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. Nothing said in this podcast was legal advice.